Evil kings doing evil things. Again. It's always a roll of the dice when slapping a quivering child on the throne. Will they mature into a fair and caring leader, or will they go goo goo gaga bonkers and tear the country asunder? Well, it really depends on whoever raises them. For the case of young Charles IX, he was screwed from the get-go. Born in the Saint-Germain-en-Laye commune in north-central France back in old 1550, young Chuck had a lot to look forward to. He was the prince after all. Surely once his dear old dad had passed at a reasonably old age after bequeathing decades of knowledge and wisdom to his growing boy, Charles would do well to carry on that legacy. It's just too bad that Chuck's dad, Henry II, caught a honkin' hunk of splintered wood in his eyeball during a jousting tournament and died from an infection. Quite an embarrassing death, wouldn't you agree? But an embarrassing death is a death nonetheless, so for a reign to progress, a prince must acquiesce his distress and take to the throne with success. After his older brother died, of course. There we go. Now up to bat, Charles took the throne in 1560. The mathematically astute among you will realize that in 1560, the new monarch would be only 10, and you're correct. The compact little croissant was now king, but he couldn't reign his way out of a cloud. So until Charles came of age, the big britches of power were instead passed on to his mother, Catherine de' Medici, and she had plans of her own. It's important to acknowledge that during this time in France, there was a lot of religious squabbling, mainly between Catholics and Protestants. They both believe in the same God, sure, it's just that their teachings are slightly different, but different enough to kill each other. The Catholics were in the majority, with the Protestants, mainly a subsect called the Huguenots, being the persecuted rebellious few, making up about 10% of France's population. With ongoing violence slowly escalating over the years, Catherine proposed the Edict of January, basically stating, "Alright, we'll tolerate y'all, but cut the shit, behave yourselves, and follow the rules." But the more committed Catholics of the French government weren't too pleased with, at the very least, putting up with all of these heretical Protestants. One such outraged individual was Francis, Duke of Guise. He already had a bad experience with the Huguenots, having recently uncovered a plot to have him removed from power. His resulting rage culminated in the massacre of Vassy, where the aforementioned Duke found a stronghold of worshipping Huguenots gathered in a church on his land. So he killed a bunch of them. This event kicked off the first of several religious wars in France. But what does all of this have to do with Charles? Well, during the years of the on and off wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, Charles became a target. He had avoided assassination and abduction attempts from the Huguenots, making it harder for the king to empathize with them. After turning 13, Charles declared himself old enough to rule on his own, granting himself full authority, though he remained heavily influenced by Mama Medici. With thousands of his own people dead and royal coffers running dry, Charles needed to end these wars once and for all. So he hatched a plan. He had arranged the marriage between his very Catholic sister Margaret and devout Huguenot leader Henry of Navarre as an act of good faith and a final peace offering. The most wealthy and influential of the Huguenot leaders flocked to witness the wedding, but many would not make it home. With growing concerns and paranoia surrounding the influx of Huguenot leaders, Charles and his mother feared that a rebellion was on the horizon. So, on August 22, 1572, under the influence of his mother, Charles ordered the execution of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the main Huguenot leaders in town.
Mind your own business!
This murder sparked the infamous Bartholomew's Day Massacre, a systematic slaughtering of thousands of Huguenots within Paris. Homes and shops were raided, pillaged, and destroyed, and bodies were disrespectfully dumped in the Seine. Wanting to take advantage of the uprising as a way to strangle any remaining life of the Huguenots' power once and for all, some historians believe that Charles pushed for the violence to extend beyond the city, despite calling for an end to the violence a few days later to save face. Over the course of the next several weeks, tens of thousands of Huguenots were executed. The massacre, however, had the opposite effect. Unsurprisingly, the Protestants were now properly pissed off, initiating more religious wars that would last for another 26 years. King Charles would never live to see peace. The aftermath of the massacre drove the young king insane, shifting between bouts of boasting and remorse. One day he would be bragging about the extremity of the brutal bloodshed, while the next he claimed to be haunted by the screams of his victims. His mental health got flushed down the shitter as he constantly expressed immense grief over the incident. It also didn't help that Mama Medici made her son feel worse, giving him the full blame and declaring him a raving lunatic. In his now vulnerable and weakened state, the young king contracted tuberculosis in spring of 1574. King Charles IX coughed himself into the great beyond a few months later at the age of 23. So was Charles IX really evil, or did he just get the raw end of the deal? We may never know. But speaking of deals... Where am I? You're in the real world, dude, and I've got something to show you. I'm not real. What you're standing on is a special little project me and my buddies at Epic Desk have been cooking up for the past few months. Oh, neat. Sure is soft. You're darn right it is. Each desk mat from Epic Desk is handcrafted and built to last. I mean, look at the quality of this thing. Damn, that desk mat is thick. It's also pretty smooth. Your mouse is gonna glide smoother than a buttered up penguin on a Teflon slip and slide. Nice hyperbolic simile, dude. Thanks. I also came up with a few more desk mat designs guaranteed to make you say, I want that. If the flame fiddle in Nero isn't your cup of tea, check out the mischievous witch and her involuntary time-traveling fella. Or how about the thigh-slappingly hilarious honking Brit? Or my personal favorite, a nice family photo of all the characters you know and love with yours truly front and center. Now, I have been using this desk mat for a while now and can legitimately vouch for its high quality and value. I really can't see myself using any other desk mat at this point. In fact, Epic Desk regularly collaborates with creators, and from what I hear, I'm not alone in this opinion. I'm really proud of these designs, and I just know that you fellas and fillettes will love them too. So if you want to support the channel and get yourself or a friend your own sweet piece of history, click my link in the pinned comment below to get started. Just don't wait too long though, because these mats are only available for a limited time, so be sure to grab one before they're gone. By the way, no restocks. Alright, next chapter. Now, when you have a damning title like The Cruel, which admittedly is badass in and of itself, it's most likely one that was earned through various acts of ferocity, or just being a downright dick. So let's take a look at what Peter I of Castile did to obtain it. Born in 1334, the pint-sized Peter Pokemon evolved into a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, chiseled chap. A hard worker and well-educated, the young prince had the qualifications to become a great leader, but he was being led by a bad example: his father. Daddy Alfonso XI was a ruthless king, but in that day and age, you kinda had to be. If you're too lenient, you're gonna get steamrolled by your enemies, but if you're too tyrannical, you're gonna catch a knife between your blades. Power! Alfonso, a man of strategy, worked tirelessly to expand his kingdom, arresting and executing any and all political opponents, often without trial. So it's pretty obvious where Peter's future policies may have been influenced. In 1350, King Alfonso XI himself caught an influential case of the Black Plague, which was ravaging Europe at the time, and ultimately dissolved from the throne, leaving it open to Peter. The determined prince donned the crown and became king of the Iberian kingdoms of Castile and Leon that same year. But it wasn't exactly a peaceful transition. Alfonso had a mistress who shot out multiple sons, half-brothers to Peter who wanted the throne for themselves, one in particular being Enrique. But we'll get to that later. King Peter was just 16 at the time of his crowning, so he sometimes took political advice from his still-alive mother. One such piece of advice was marrying the alliterative 14-year-old Blanche of Bourbon in 1353. Do you, King Peter, take Blanche to be your wife for life? Clearly not thrilled with this venture, Peter, just 2 days after marriage, abandoned Blanche for his side chick and ultimate love interest, Maria de Padilla, with whom he married in secret before Bland asked Blanche. They had 4 babies together. Yeah, that's how it works. As for Blanche, it's actually kind of a sad story. Peter not only abandoned her, but had her imprisoned in a town near the southernmost point of the Iberian Peninsula, far away from the kingdom. Though she was briefly a queen, Blanche died in captivity in 1361 under mysterious circumstances. Some historians believe that she was either poisoned or caught a crossbow bolt in the skull under Peter's command, though this is debated. Pretty cruel if you ask me. However, during his reign, Peter also earned the title of Peter the Just from his supporters. The king had attempted to centralize power away from wealthy nobles, giving platform to commoners and minority populations, particularly Jews and Muslims. The nobles, unsurprisingly, did not like that one bit. But since the king was king and all, any nobles who felt particularly rebellious or treasonous were given a peaceful view of the horizon, from a hanging rope. This trouble and turmoil among the ranks inspired a desire for someone to overthrow the crazed king. And who should show up but the various half-brothers from before? After many rebellions staged by said half-brothers, Peter captured and executed them all, including their mother. One brother was reportedly hacked to pieces as Peter looked on with a shit-eating grin. However, one brother managed to escape. Enrique evaded capture and fled to France, where he started to gather allies under French King John II. This caught the attention of another Peter, Peter of the neighboring kingdom of Aragon. Thus began the War of the Two Peters in 1356. Castile proceeded to kick Aragon's shit in, but Aragon had an ace up its sleeve. Yup, he was back. And now he was also backed by Aragon and the French. Enrique infiltrated Castile and actually managed to dethrone Peter, who ran away to England for backup in order to exact revenge, which he did. Peter regained his throne after the Battle of Nájera in 1367, but he failed to properly thank and pay tribute to the English for their help. Bad move. Now back at the helm, Peter systematically tortured and executed any and all nobles whom he deemed supportive of Enrique, oftentimes without proof. Peter lived in pure paranoia for the next few years, failing to trust any advisors or nobles, leading to a collapse in political power. Seeing the perfect opportunity for a critical final strike, Enrique attacked once more with the Battle of Montiel in March of 1390. Peter was defeated and was stabbed in the freaking face with a knife by his half-brother, who finally took the throne for good. Until he died of heart failure a decade later. In Chinese history, Di Xin of the Shang dynasty is a textbook example of how greed, corruption, and tyranny can twist a leader into moral depravity. After his death, Di Xin was given the posthumous title of King Zhou, with Zhou being the name of the part of a saddle that wraps around a horse's tail and brushes along its butthole. That's a rather creative insult, so you know this guy messed up something awful. Now, being an ancient king and all, historians are forced to rely on often very heavily exaggerated and embellished stories and legends, so for this chapter, take what you will with a grain of salt. Also, forgive my pronunciations. And also subscribe. Alright. King Butthole Strap began his reign in 1075 BC. According to ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian, the king was an exceptionally gifted fella, able to outsmart any opponent and strong enough to successfully hunt with nothing more than his bare hands. Doubtful, but whatever. Paired up with his favorite consort, the lovely and sadistic Da Qi, the two became a powerhouse of torture and torment for those unfortunate enough to be in their vicinity. Although remembered as a competent strategist, able to expand his empire through military campaigns, the king was blinded by his infatuation with Da Qi and drained the kingdom's coffers on extravagance. He was the king, and he truly wanted to live like one. According to legend, King Zhou would stop at nothing to fulfill the wishes of Da Qi, going as far as to build an elaborate palace garden crammed full of rare and exotic animals. Well, that's not too bad, you might say, with a bit of drool on your chin. Well, how about forcing royal subjects to drink from a freshly dug out wine pond or eat meat from hanging tree limbs? Oh yeah, they were all naked too. Where's all the hanging meat? I think I found it. These breezy brunches, along with any other over-the-top nonsensical nonsense, was funded solely by the taxpayers, which pissed them off.
You stupid!
The king's public support was nearly non-existent. It's just too bad that any outspoken individuals were subject to immediate imprisonment and torture. One such torture was the roasting beam, an invention of the king's own design. A long, hollow bronze beam positioned over a roaring fire. The roasting beam was stuffed with searing hot coals, transferring their heat to the highly thermoconductive bronze. The king would also take the time to grease up his long pole. According to legend, King Zhou had forced prisoners to walk across the pole, promising release if they were successful. They weren't. An alternate version of this torture device was flipped 90 degrees, a bronze column to which the victim was chained while a fire roared beneath them, cooking the victim to a delicate medium rare. You know, firm, but with a little give. The king and his main squeeze would reportedly revel in the pain inflicted on their prisoners, seeing the torment as pure cinema. Now, when you live life in excess and are tyrannical and maniacal dickbags to your starving and suffering subjects, it's pretty easy to understand that said subjects are going to want to murder you. Like, passionately murder you. King Zhou's relatives begged him to change his ways and shift towards a noble and kind rule. He would not be persuaded. At least, not until this handsome bag of biscuits showed up. This is Chifa of Zhou. Now, to clear some things up here, Zhou is not Zhou. This is Zhou. This is Zhou. Different inflection, different words. I don't know, man. The Chinese language is complicated. While evil-ass King Zhou was getting his rocks off watching dudes burn, Chifa was gathering an army. Refusing to be threatened, the king answered the call of war in the Battle of Moye in 1046 BC, but ultimately got his metaphorical socks knocked off so hard that he faced defeat. The greedy king then retreated into his palace, surrounded himself with his treasures, and, symbolic of the gilded dumpster fire that was his reign, set everything, including himself, ablaze at the age of 59. Da Qi, hearing of her beloved king's death, logged out of the server by strangling herself. Da Qi was ultimately blamed for the king's erratic behavior, believed by many to have been possessed by a demonic nine-tailed fox spirit, Naruto style. And thus with the death of King Zhou, the Zhou dynasty came into power. How about that? The word terrible is tossed around like a frisbee at a blind picnic, so much so that it's lost its original meaning, like the word literally. Sure, terrible can mean something exceptionally bad, but it also means something that instills terror or is sinister in nature, in essence, of pure evil. See, there's a difference between, ugh, this is terrible, and which is why Ivan was named as such, making for a terrible yet shareable parable. Continuing the trend in this video, Ivan began his reign young, being only 16 when crowned Tsar of all Russia in 1547. His early years as ruler were actually pretty peaceful and progressive. The Tsar had revised law code, established a standing army, and granted the rights of self-government to rural regions. But in 1553, Ivan was stricken with a near-fatal illness. Weak and weary on his deathbed, Ivan requested that his closest nobles swear allegiance to his son in the event of his death. Please, my son.
I require many soggy oats.
What the fuck is that thing? They refused. This prompted Ivan to enact his Plan B. Ivan's health eventually recovered, unlike his trust in his supposedly loyal nobles. The Tsar pushed to expand Russian territory with the hope of opening up opportunistic trade routes. Naturally, this instigated several battles of territorial control. Ivan saw many a success, but each at a deep cost of Russian resources. And then in 1558 came the Livonian War, a war aimed at taking control of Old Livonia, which would grant Russia much-needed access to the Baltic Sea. Facing off against the kingdoms of Sweden and Poland, along with Lithuania and other European strengths, Russia was devastated. The cost of this war threw the country into economic ruin, and it was only downhill from there for poor Ivan. Famine and drought ravaged the land, his friggin' wife died, and various betrayals caused the Tsar to spiral into a manic depression, even going as far as writing a letter of resignation from the throne. The nobles, terrified to rule the country themselves, begged for Ivan's return, which he agreed, but on one condition. He would be granted absolute power over every aspect of the country, including, and most importantly, the right to execute any traitors of the crown. They hesitantly agreed. Thus, Ivan returned to power with a tight, unrelenting grip. He immediately established the Oprichniki, his very own personal guard. In exchange for wealth and privilege, these soldiers were Ivan's eyes and ears around the country, given the job of sniffing out any potential disloyalty. That great power remained completely unchecked. Under Ivan's rule, they executed and exiled thousands of nobles, seized their land, and harshly oppressed peasants. Things only got worse. By 1570, the iconic plague, TM, tore through the country, killing thousands by the day. Novgorod, one of Russia's most prominent cities, was crippled by plague, famine, and Ivan's ruthless rulings. Ivan himself feared that the entire city would defect to Lithuania, because yeah, that Livonian War was still going on during all of this, and so he decided to make a preemptive strike. In January of 1570, Ivan's Oprichniki invaded the city and began their reign of terror. Those attempting to escape found it impossible, as Ivan's forces had barricaded the city. They were trapped. Captives were tortured for information about their supposed plans for the betrayal of the crown, but none could speak of a truth that didn't exist. Citizens were either burned alive or tied up and thrown into the freezing river, suffocating under the ice. Farms surrounding the city were completely destroyed, condemning any already starving survivors to death without any possible sustenance. By the end of the massacre a few weeks later, thousands of people lay dead in Ivan's wake. Any and all valuables from homes, shops, and churches were stripped, taken back to Ivan's home in Moscow, and divided amongst the Oprichniki soldiers. The Tsar's brutality had truly hit an apex, but it would soon hit a bit too close to home. On November 16, 1581, Ivan got in a heated argument with his 27-year-old son after having savagely beaten his pregnant daughter-in-law Yelena for being inappropriately dressed. The father-son altercation quickly rose to a boiling point, and Ivan lashed out, striking a single fatal blow across his son's head with a heavy cane. He had killed his own son. Worse yet, Yelena miscarried just hours later due to her injuries. Ivan collapsed to the ground, a broken man, holding his son's corpse. Before him flashed his own life of desolation and despair. After the incident, Ivan became remorseful for his past actions. In his final years, the Tsar had agreed to a truce with Lithuania, finally ending the 24-year-long Livonian War. He tied up all loose ends and made peace with himself, but this didn't stop his physical deterioration. By 1584, Tsar Ivan was a frail man. Although only 53, decades of physical and mental anguish destroyed his body and mind, not to mention long-term effects from mercury addiction. On March 28, 1584, Ivan suffered a stroke and died while playing a game of chess, causing two kings to fall at once. Terrible stuff, right? If you haven't, go check out my other Evil Kings video if you were hoping to see some other kings on the list. It's right over here. I'll see you over there.